One of the things that struck me as I was thinking about writing this book was how people believed it was their fault that they were in debt, that there was the moral failure of younger people, in particular, people born and coming of age after the 1970s and 80s. That somehow their grandparents never borrowed, whereas all around us we're in student debt, credit card debt, car debt. How did that happen? Why are we in so much debt compared, as we think, to our grandparents? And as I thought about it, and the more I wrote about it, the more I realized it's not true. In fact, what had happened was that our grandparents had developed this entire infrastructure of debt. When they lived in those post-war suburbs where they told you they never borrowed, they actually borrowed all the time. They borrowed for their houses on FHA loans. They borrowed for their cars from GMAC. They borrowed at department stores on charge accounts. What was different for them was that they had good paying jobs. Since 1970, debt has risen and wages have stagnated. This is no coincidence. In the post-war period, Americans borrowed a tremendous amount, and they developed new ways to borrow: credit cards, new institutions to borrow from, finance companies. What changed in the 1970s wasn't that Americans began to borrow, it's that they began to be paid less. And we see the expansion this over the 80s and 90s, beginning with the working class in the 1970s and really expanding into the middle class by the 1990s. It's important to understand how debt became a profitable activity in the American economy. So if you look at the late 19th century, you understand that debt was everywhere, but it was everywhere on the margins. It wasn't something that banks did. It wasn't something that the biggest companies did. It was something you did in your neighborhood. It was something you did with a loan shark. What happens in the 20th century is that small loans become big business, that debt becomes part of the American way of life.